Most people assume that survival in the brutal winters of the Second World War came down to wool blankets, layered uniforms, and sheer endurance. When we talk about soldiers freezing on the Eastern Front or in the Ardennes, the image is always the same: men wrapped in whatever fabric they could find, huddled in foxholes waiting for dawn. What's often overlooked is that one of the most effective tools against the cold was not a blanket at all, but a small metal tube filled with chemical fuel. It didn't look impressive, it didn't win battles, but it quietly prevented frostbite, preserved fighting strength, and in many cases made the difference between operational readiness and collapse. If you value in-depth historical analysis like this, focus not on spectacle, but on overlooked realities, subscribe and follow the Untold Archive. Growing this page allows more space for careful research and serious discussion of the details that shaped outcomes in ways most summaries ignore. The war against cold was as real as the war against the enemy. Cold weather was not a background condition in the Second World War. It was an active combatant. On the Eastern Front, temperatures routinely fell below -30 degrees Celsius. In the Ardennes, during the winter of 1944, American troops endured freezing rain, snow, and prolonged exposure without adequate winter gear. Frostbite casualties in some formations rivaled combat injuries. Weapons malfunctioned, lubricants thickened, batteries failed, and men lost dexterity in their hands long before they lost morale. Military planners had long understood that cold reduces combat effectiveness. Napoleon's army had learned it in Russia. The German High Command should have known it in 1941. Yet logistical assumptions repeatedly underestimated the speed and severity with which winter could immobilize an army. Proper winter clothing was often delayed. Sleeping bags, as we understand them today, were not widely issued in the early years of the war. Soldiers relied heavily on blankets, shelter halves, and improvised insulation. It was in this environment that small portable chemical heaters, often little more than metal tubes, became disproportionately valuable. The device varied by nation, but the principle was, similar. The United States military issued pocket and body warmers fueled by catalytic reactions, commonly using lighter fluid. German forces used chemically activated heat sources as well, along with charcoal-based pocket stoves. Japanese forces had their own versions, sometimes referred to as Cairo, which used slow-burning fuel sticks inserted into metal enclosures. In every case, the concept was straightforward. Controlled oxidation inside a small vented tube generated steady warmth without open flame. Unlike a campfire, these heaters produced no visible light. Unlike a stove, they required no large fuel source. A single fill could provide warmth for hours. Soldiers placed them in pockets, inside gloves, or near their core under layered uniforms. In some cases, they were used inside boots to prevent frostbite in static defensive positions. What made these devices significant was not their heat output alone, but their portability and discreteness. In forward positions, lighting a fire was often impossible. Smoke revealed positions. Movement was limited. A compact tube that could radiate warmth silently and safely allowed soldiers to conserve body heat during long watches, night patrols, or immobile defensive operations. Frostbite and fatigue were strategic liabilities. Cold injuries do not simply cause discomfort, they degrade coordination, slow reaction time, and increase error rates. A soldier with numbed fingers cannot reliably operate a rifle bolt, load ammunition, or repair equipment. Prolonged exposure increases caloric demands, meaning that already strained supply lines must deliver more food to maintain the same operational capacity. On the Eastern Front, German forces suffered catastrophic equipment failures as temperatures plunged. Lubricants congealed, engines failed to start. Infantry without adequate winterization suffered frostbite in large numbers. The Soviet army, by contrast, had institutional memory of winter warfare and better integrated cold weather gear into planning. While the Soviet advantage was not absolute, their logistical preparation demonstrated how environmental adaptation directly influenced combat sustainability. Small heating devices did not solve these systemic failures, but they mitigated their human consequences. A soldier who could preserve dexterity overnight was less likely to become a casualty of cold and more likely to function effectively the next day. Chemical warmth offered lessons in energy efficiency under constraint. The brilliance of the metal heating tube lay in its efficiency. It relied on catalytic combustion or slow oxidation, producing steady heat without consuming oxygen at dangerous rates. The reaction was controlled and contained. For armies operating at the edge of supply capacity, the ability to generate localized warmth from small quantities of fuel was, well, absolutely critical. This was survival engineering, not luxury. Weight mattered. Every item carried by an infantryman was scrutinized. If a device could justify its weight by preventing frostbite or maintaining combat readiness, it earned its place in the kit. Modern survival doctrine reflects similar principles. Ultralight backpackers and cold weather specialists emphasize targeted heat retention rather than excessive bulk. Heating the core and extremities efficiently reduces total insulation requirements. The wartime use of chemical warmers anticipated this understanding. It was not about comfort. It was about preserving function. Not every soldier received standardized equipment. In many units, men improvised. Empty ration tins were converted into small stoves. Fuel tablets were rationed carefully. Charcoal fragments were repurposed. The existence of official heating tubes did not eliminate scarcity, but it provided a template. Compact, contained heat generation was feasible and worth pursuing. The broader lesson is that adaptation often emerges at the tactical level when strategic planning falls short. Soldiers on the ground recognized quickly that maintaining warmth was not optional. They innovated when necessary. This pattern repeats throughout military history. Institutional doctrine evolves, but it often does so in response to field improvisation under stress. After the war, formal cold weather training expanded significantly. The United States military developed specialized Arctic survival schools. NATO doctrine incorporated environmental preparedness more explicitly. Equipment design evolved to include integrated cold weather gear, improved sleeping systems, and more reliable personal heating solutions. Chemical hand warmers became standardized. Modern flameless ration heaters, though designed for food, reflect the same chemical principles refined during the war. Portable heating technology advanced not because it was glamorous, but because the consequences of neglect had been documented in frozen trenches and immobilized divisions. The legacy of those small metal tubes is not visible in memorials or battlefield maps. It appears instead in procurement lists and survival manuals. It represents a quiet correction, an institutional acknowledgement that climate can defeat an army as effectively as an opposing force. Survival is rarely dramatic, but it is always decisive. There's a tendency in historical storytelling to focus on maneuvers, offensives, and decisive engagements. Yet endurance often determines whether those engagements can even occur. An army that cannot endure the night cannot fight effectively at dawn. Preserving warmth preserved manpower. Preserved manpower sustained operations. Sustained operations influenced outcomes. The metal heating tube was not a miracle device. It did not reverse defeats or guarantee victory. But it addressed a fundamental vulnerability. It reduced frostbite cases. It maintained dexterity. It allowed soldiers to remain in position without revealing themselves. In that sense, it was a quiet multiplier of resilience. Understanding these overlooked tools changes how we interpret winter campaigns. It shifts attention from dramatic collapses to incremental preservation. It reminds us that survival technologies, however small, shape the boundary between capability and failure. Remembering these details matters because they reveal how wars are truly sustained, not only through strategy and firepower, but through adaptation to the environment. The lessons remain relevant for anyone studying military history or thinking seriously about preparedness. Follow the Untold Archive for more examinations of the overlooked mechanisms that shaped global events, and share this video if you value careful, in-depth historical analysis that goes beyond the surface.